right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to class. Happy Monday. I hope you're all doing well and that you're all healthy as we continue to get through this challenging year. But here we are, right? So, all right, y'all. So we're in for a really great discussion today about the movement, the Chicana Chicano movement of the 1990s. How many of you were born after the 1990s? Like just use your little emoji with a thumbs up or something. Or were you maybe born in the mid 90s or late 90s? Okay. Yeah. So this happened as you were being born or right before you were born, right? So this is just to kind of take you back a little bit. For some of us, it feels like yesterday. So it kind of trips us out that we have students who were babies or maybe not even born when this was happening, and it feels like yesterday to us. So I'm going to introduce to you our guest speaker today. Today we have with us Oscar de la Torre, who was elected by his peers to serve as student body president at Santa Monica High School in 1989 to 1990, and then again at California State University at Chico in 1994 and 95. While at Chico State, Oscar organized against the anti-immigrant Proposition 187 and the anti-affirmative action Proposition 209. While attending the University of Texas, Oscar co-founded Students for Access and Opportunity as a response to the elimination of affirmative action policies in Texas. After completing his master's degree in public affairs from the University of Texas, Mr. de la Torre returned to Santa Monica High to serve his community. In November 2002, de la Torre was elected as the youngest member to serve on the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Board of Education. In response to 4 gang-related homicides and 5 shootings, Mr. de la Torre led community efforts to create the Pico Youth and Family Center. He served as executive director of PYFC for 20 years. He recently completed his term as president of the California Latino School Board Association and is currently running for city council in the city of Santa Monica. All right, everyone, so please welcome with your applause, Oscar de la Torre. Thank you for being with us. I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to you. And as he is giving his presentation, please jot down some comments or questions so that we can be ready for Q&A. And then if you wanna type in the chat any questions or comments that you have along the way, please feel free to do that, okay? Oscar, thank you for being with us.
Yes, thank you, Veronica. It's a pleasure to be here and to see all these bright, energetic faces on the Zoom. I'd rather do this all in person, but this is the new way to do things, right? But it's any which way, it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all today. My name is Oscar de la Torre, and I grew up in the city of Santa Monica. Graduated from high school in 1990, and then went to the Chico State University, and then up north, Northern California, for those of you who know where Chico's at. And then from there, I went to the University of Texas in Austin. And all my life, I've been an activist. So, you know, my upbringing, I grew up in Santa Monica, but not in an affluent community. I grew up in the poor part of the city. And some of you that have been to Santa Monica, you're like, wait a minute, Santa Monica is a very mostly white, wealthy community, and it is. But in my neighborhood, there were no white people living on my block. It was a segregated part of the city called the Pico neighborhood. So I grew up, you know, mom and dad, hardworking people, you know, immigrant from Jalisco. They immigrated from Jalisco, and we lived in an apartment. It was crowded. There was 7 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment. So I remember, you know, people sleeping in the living room, and it was a little tough sometimes, but it also made for great relationships, you know, between all of us as siblings. I want to talk to you all today about the 90s and some of the laws and our reaction, our resistance to the laws that were passed, and I want to make a connection to how it's so relevant today to what you all are experiencing with the current administration and the White House. There's a lot of parallels there. And I want to start right there. There's a book that recently came out. So this book is called Hate Monger. You can see the title right there, Hate Monger. This guy in the back though, his name is Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is Donald Trump's speechwriter. In fact, of all the staff that were very close to the president, he's the only one that survived. There's been a whole bunch of them that have came and went, but he's a speechwriter, also the architect of the anti-Muslim ban, and also the immigration, the zero tolerance policies on undocumented immigration, putting kids in cages, for example. Stephen Miller. And why is that important is because Stephen Miller came from Santa Monica. So I actually interacted with him when I was working at the high school. When I came back to my community back in '98, he was a student at Santa Monica High School. And he was very racist back then. Like this guy was, he believes that, like a lot of these white supremacists, they believe that what I'm looking at right now, like when I look at my computer and I see all these brown faces and mestizos and Latinos, and it seems to be mostly Latino. I would say, are there white, black? Is it Central American? I mean, where's everybody from? Anybody not Latino? Let's just start there. Anybody not Latino?
Go ahead and speak up, y'all.
Okay, Tristan. Hey, Tristan. Okay, so a lot of these white supremacists, if they would look at this, what I'm looking at, they would say this is the downfall of the country. They believe that white, Anglo-Saxon, people should be running the country, and they feel that the more blacks and Latinos and Asians come into the country, they feel that that's the downfall of the country. That's how they think. They don't see diversity as strength. They see diversity as weakness. That ideology, when this book came out, I interviewed for this book. The ideology espoused by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. Donald Trump started his whole campaign with an attack on Mexican immigrants, right? That's how he started. Like he launches his whole campaign attacking Mexican immigrants. That happened in California with Governor Pete Wilson. And I'm going to talk about Proposition 187. But the way Pete Wilson in California used anti-immigration, right, as a polarizing force to turn out his base, that's the same thing that Donald Trump did. Now, in this book, Fearmonger, in chapter 2, there's a chapter that is, the title of the chapter is called Brown Animals. So this is the chapter that is called Brown Animals. Now, this chapter, what the author did is talked about a hate crime that occurred in the city of Santa Monica. I was student body president in 1990, and I graduated. I went to Chico State. 1991, a hate letter came out against Mexican people. And it said stuff like, we'll gas you like Hitler gassed the Jews, F you Mexicans, your mother's a whore, your father's a pimp. It was a horrible letter, single space, just a bunch of craziness, you're taking our welfare money. It was just a lot of the same stuff, though, that you're hearing right now. Very similar rhetoric, The immigrants are coming in and taking our jobs. The immigrants are coming in and bringing crime. The immigrants are the reason why, all these bad things are happening in the country. And the truth of the matter is that the jobs were being lost, not because immigrants were taking those jobs. The jobs were being lost because those jobs were leaving to China. The jobs were leaving to Mexico. They were leaving to other parts of the world where the corporations can benefit from cheap labor, right? So we got to be careful, in terms of how the politicians trick people and create this division and pit us against each other. All along the lines, they're making decisions that are having a negative impact on Americans. And so it's really important to understand that, to be critical thinkers. So let's talk about Proposition 187. We'll start there. And I want to share, I want to share a couple of images. I'm going to show you some pictures. I started looking at some pictures, and I want to share them with you all. So, well, let me start with this one. Okay, no, that's the wrong one. That's affirmative action. Let's see, where's the, oh, that's not it, same one. I can't see it very well. Here we go. Okay, let me Oh, I gotta go to share screen. And, all right, can you all see it now? Oh, you see it?
Yes.
All right, so this picture, the date on this picture is October 12th, 1994. October 12th of 1994. That's me holding up the paper. And it says AS opposes Prop 187. AS is Associated Students. So the student government, I was student body president at Chico State, and the student government passed a resolution against Proposition 187. And we held a rally. We organized a rally. It says right here at Proposition 187 rally in the free speech area. They had a free speech area. Associated Students President de la Torre presents his views regarding the reasoning behind the proposition. And so they called it the Save Our State Initiative. It wasn't just Latino students protesting. We had white students, Black students. A lot of people were involved in that. It was a horrible law. This law was produced by the Republican Party in the state of California. Pete Wilson was running for re-election. And so this was the Republican Party's strategy to turn out the vote, to make sure that people that, believed, that had very strong beliefs against immigration would turn out to vote for the governor, Pete Wilson. It was effective, it worked. But it did, and I'll tell you how horrible this law is. But before that, I want to tell you a quick little story. I had organized a Jewish Latino Holocaust remembrance event with a rabbi, Neil Thomas Daniels, who lives here in Santa Monica. And we did this event. And I asked him a question. I said, why is it that, when you see these images of World War II, you see Jewish people walking to the death camps, like walking into a gas chamber, and they're not fighting. Because in my mind, I'm like, if you're gonna kill me and I'm not gonna walk there, I'm not gonna make it easy for you. I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna pick up a rock. I mean, you're gonna have to shoot me, I'm not gonna walk in there, And he said something that was very profound. He said, well, the images that you're seeing are images of my people at their weakest moment. That at that point, they're just walking to their death because, they had already gone through so much. And he asked me, he goes, do you know about the Nuremberg laws? Nuremberg laws. And I said, no, I never heard about that. He said, you should look it up, do the research, and then come back and we'll have that conversation. And I did. I looked up the Nuremberg laws. So when the Nazi Party took power, the first laws that they passed were to eliminate citizenship from the Jewish citizenry. So if you were Jewish, you lost your citizenship. The second law was that you cannot regain your citizenship by marrying a German citizen. And then the third law was you can't own a business. Anyway, the point is that they passed a series of laws to weaken the Jewish community. And I saw the parallels with Proposition 187, Proposition 209, Proposition 227. All of those laws, all of them impact education. Proposition 187 said that undocumented students were prohibited from attending public schools. Imagine that. Like this law was proposing that children who, for no fault of their own, are in this country, many of them, their parents brought them and hard conditions that they're trying to escape. Now they're in public school. By the way, they're in public school because there's a Supreme Court decision in the 1950s that says that it is legal, it is appropriate for anybody under the age of 18 to be in public school, even if they're not citizens. So that's a constitutionally protected right for, makes sense because education is so important to democracy. But that's what the proposition was proposing, to kick children out of schools. There was a quote, a friend of mine, Alicia, she said, her quote was, kicking minority kids who are American citizens out of schools is like deporting them into the streets. It's blatant racism and we will all be suspect. There was a chant, I remember the chant was, one of the chants was from hell to heaven, no on 187. And we organized a huge protest, about 2,000 students in opposition to this law. About three high schools walked out Chico High School, and then there was like Gridley, and I forgot the Oroville. You know, there's different towns up north, and all those high school students came to Chico State to join us. And we had about 2,000 students, and we shut down downtown Chico. Like we had the largest demonstration. One professor said he hadn't seen a demonstration that large since the Vietnam War, since students protested the war in Vietnam. So 1994 was a big moment for us, for student activism. And Proposition 187 was a very important rallying point for us, and fighting the racism in Proposition 187. And you know, we the state voted and the state passed this law. This law actually passed, but then it got thrown out by the courts. So it got passed by the voters. Governor Pete Wilson was reelected, and then what happened? The courts determined that the law was unconstitutional. And we already knew that on the premise of the education of kicking children out, that it was not valid because it was going to be unconstitutional. And there were other provisions in the law as well. Veronica, you want to talk about the provision around prenatal care for women and other medical services? The law prohibited a bunch of other medical services for undocumented women. Veronica, you want to explain that part?
Yes, for sure. So Proposition 187 also prohibited healthcare for any undocumented person. And this included women, prenatal care for women. Okay, so when there is no access to prenatal care, then the probability of there being some kind of infant mortality or something happening to mom like skyrockets, right? And so please understand that this is a direct attack on our people, because one, if we are not giving any kind of health benefits or education or even giving citizenship to the babies that were being born, then what they're doing is cutting off our lifeline, like Oscar was explaining, is trying to make us weak as a people, right? So that little by little they can do whatever they need to do to us, so we're no longer a threat to the status quo. And so unfortunately, that's what our undocumented women were faced with. They were in fear of not receiving any kind of prenatal care for themselves or for their babies. And of course, you know, they understand that the you know, Mexican American, Chicano, Latin American people, you know, the population was increasing. You know, we're now the majority in the state of California. And so they know this. They're calculating projections and whatever. And so they have to put strategies and tactics in place to make sure that they keep us marginalized and disenfranchised and unhealthy and uneducated, so that they continue to suppress our vote. Right? If we're not citizens, even if we're born in this country, then we can't vote, right? If there's a school to prison pipeline, which means there's no education for our youth, so what are they going to do without an education? Likely get involved in crime to survive, and then they end up in prison. Once you go to prison, you no longer have the right to vote. So they're thinking long term, how can we take away their power? Our power is to vote because we have the numbers, but they do everything that they can to eliminate that. So that's just another part of Prop 187.
Yeah, real important to understand, you know, that all these laws came in a package. You know, this was like the first one, but then there was a series of them. And we're going to talk about some of the more, you know, hardcore ones. But, you know, the other thing that's to be said about this is that this attack right here, it woke us up. It like definitely made the Chicano Latino community wake up like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But it also did something else. Just like, you know, how did President Trump start his campaign? He said, you know, Mexicans are rapists, drug dealers, criminals, you know. And, you know, this strategy of using like the anti-immigration sort of appeal, like using laws, and it is a strategy for the people, for the right wing, for the people that are more, you know, racist, to turn out their base. It's a political strategy. And it's a way, and Trump used it when he launched his campaign. He's using it now, right? Build the wall has the same effect. Well, that strategy started in California with Pete Wilson in 1994. So it's important to understand sort of how these things, you know, they cycle back and they're utilized. It's a strategy, it's a political strategy. And you know, the most important thing to understand, you know, when immigrants, whether they're documented or undocumented, like when you go buy clothes or groceries, or you're paying taxes, right? And even if people are using a fake social security number, somebody, you know, they're paying into the system, you know, but no one's asking them when they go to the store if they have a green card or not, or if they're documented or undocumented. Like, all the studies have shown that immigration is a plus. It doesn't have the cost to taxpayers that these people you know, like to claim. You know, immigration is a bonus for the country, and so it's real important to understand that. And in any case, one thing that it did in my family, it made 5 of us become citizens, and all of them vote. So I was the first in my family out of 8 kids. I was the first to be born in this country. And then my sisters, you know, brothers, they became citizens. My mom and my dad, they weren't citizens, you know, until Proposition 187. Not only did they become citizens, they vote all the time, because from Proposition 187, it woke everybody up, and we said, look, you know, we got to get involved. We got to vote, because if not, like, they're going to keep passing these laws against us. And a lot of the reasons why now you have sanctuary cities, why you have more liberal approach, and as Veronica pointed out, why you haven't had a Republican governor ever since Pete Wilson. Pete Wilson was the last Republican governor, and I would say the last person who's ever going to, you know, basically criminalize, you know, undocumented people, is because of Proposition 187, because the impact that it had. It woke up a whole community. Like they always said, we're the sleeping giant. Well, Proposition 187 woke us up. Somebody one time said, hey man, we should thank Pete Wilson. And I was like, why? He's like, because look at what Pete Wilson did. He made it so that Latinos really got involved, you know? And I guess some people probably will say the same thing about Donald Trump, you know? That ultimately, when we get attacked, our people wake up, and it could lead to something positive. So sometimes you're living in a negative state, but it can turn around depending on what we do, right? Depending on what actions we take. We with Proposition 187, we made sure when I was in Chico that it was a big issue. We lobbied, we fought hard, we protested, we made it, you know, really important in our community. And it's unfortunate that we still see some of these anti-immigrant, you know, bills and anti-immigrant rhetoric, you know, at the national level. But the good thing is we don't see it so much anymore in statewide races in the state of California, because Proposition 187 caused a lot of people to wake up and get involved and vote, you know. So I guess we can, let me show you another picture. This is an interesting picture here. So this, we you know, part of the protest movement, you know, when young people get involved, I mean, they're bold, you know, young people, they take chances. They do things that older folks don't do. Here we were in the rain. If you notice, there's umbrellas. It was a rainy day, and you know, some people would be like, it shows our commitment, you know. And these were all students. These were all mostly Latino students, not all Latino, but it was mostly Latino. You see, racist Richter, time to crack down. I'll go back to Bernie Richter. Bernie Richter was an assembly member who was very racist up in Chico State. Then it says no Richter, no Wilson.
Oh, Oscar, go ahead. We're still looking at your previous one, so you have to go on. I think you might have to unshare and then share again, so that that one pops up for you, so you can select it.
Let's see. All right.
There it is.
Okay. Okay, so you see Richter and Wilson. Pete Wilson was the governor. This was a protest in the rain at one of the Elks Lodges. They were having a pancake breakfast. And I got put in handcuffs that day. What happened is I put on a suit, you know, and I snuck in there, and I bought my ticket, and I sat down to eat pancakes. And the idea was for me to, when the governor was going to give a speech, I was going to get up there and hold up a big banner, you know, big sign. I had a sign tucked away in my jacket, but you know, I was trying to hide, you know, and I eat my pancakes. And right before I got a bite of my pancakes, the college Republican president, he spotted me, and he's like, "There's Oscar. That guy's not supposed to be here." And so cops got me, and they put me in handcuffs. and they threw me out of the spot, you know? So I got thrown out, and I was like, hey, why can't I be here? Like, I'm not gonna do nothing, you know, but they were like, whatever, you're not supposed to be here. So they kicked me out, but we did a bunch of stuff. I mean, a lot of protests. There was a lot of movement, you know, sort of what you're seeing right now, you know, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. You know, it was Proposition 187 was like that. Like, it was just every week we were meeting, we were plotting, planning, you know, there was a lot of activism, you know. So this was like NORM 187, and just another picture. And these were all students. This was it looks like May 11th, 1994. So January, February, March, May, June, July, August, September, October. The first picture I showed you was from October of 1994. So think, like, you know, there was just a lot of action, like all the way until the election, all the way until November of 1994, when the election happened. Like, we were just very active. You know, there was a lot of protests. Oh, with who? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I guess we can go on to affirmative action. Do we want to have any questions on Prop 187 first, Veronica, and then go on to affirmative action?
Does anybody have questions on Prop 187? And I do want to share a picture also, because you were talking about, yeah, I just want to like touch on something that you talked about. But does anybody have any questions first for Oscar about Prop 187, or any comments?
You mentioned that in the same year as Prop 187, there were a bunch of other really terrible propositions as well, like Prop 200 some of it.
209.
What was 209 about?
Okay, so we're going to talk about that one next. Proposition 209 was to eliminate affirmative action in the state of California. And then there was another one called Proposition 227 to eliminate bilingual education in the state of California. So if you notice, all of those have like educational components. Prop 187, undocumented students can't be in school anymore. Proposition 209 and affirmative action, mainly around university admissions to make it harder for people of color to access universities. And then Proposition 227 to eliminate bilingual education. So it's real important to understand, like, all of this hinders the educational advancement of Latinos and other people of color, but definitely the Latino community has been targeted by these politicians.
Yeah, and they understand that if we are educated people, then we become a dangerous mess, right? Because we know what's happening around us. And so that's why it's important for us to be sharing our education here from the Cal State classroom in Chicana Chicano studies, and sharing it with the world out there, right? Because if people don't have access to this information, then we continue to have this veil in front of our eyes and not really be able to see with the clear critical lens what is happening around us and what has been happening historically to our people. Like, a lot of people have never, you know, probably completely forgot about or have never even heard of these propositions before, right? So if we know about these, then we can look at the patterns of systemic racism and systemic oppression, right? And we have to be able to understand that and see that and analyze it if we want to dismantle it, if we want to disrupt it. But how are we going to change this very racist system if we don't even know what has been going on, you know, for decades and even hundreds of years? And mind you, bilingual education was a right given to Mexican American citizens through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, okay? So and for the record, every single treaty that has ever been written by the US government has never, ever been fulfilled, not to Mexicans, Mexican Americans, not to any Native American group, not to anybody, right? So a treaty is just like words. There's no actual action behind it that they follow. So, but before we move on to Prop 209, I do want to touch on something that Oscar said, right? So we have this Republican, very racist governor, Pete Wilson, when he was pushing for these kinds of laws, you know, he emboldened a lot of racist people, white nationalist people. And we see the same thing happening with Trump, right? And so there's good and bad behind that. The bad part is that, dang, there's a lot of racists out there, like a lot. The good thing is that they bring them all out of the woodworks and we can see them for what they are, And then if we can see them clearly, then we can plan accordingly. We can organize accordingly, right? And we can push back, because a lot of the times they're undercover and they're pushing all these little policies that end up mounting up to a lot, and it's done right under our nose and we can't see it because they're sneaky like that. But when they're out front like that and very emboldened, then we can see it clearly and we can address it much more effectively, okay? So I want to give an example of what happened in Ventura when Trump was elected. So Ventura is where I'm from, where Ventura County is CSU Channel Islands on the traditional Chumash territory. And so when Trump was elected, we had a lot of folks in Kentucky, also known as Kentucky, come out as like hardcore racists. And this included a lot of youth, because those are the households that they grow up in. So what happened in one of our high schools, Buena High School to be exact in Ventura, is that we had 2 white high school students, they're on the water polo team. They went to where the swimming pool is at Buena High School and they took pictures there. And then they went ahead and photoshopped these pictures, and I'm going to share that picture with you. Okay, y'all see that picture?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is that's the water polo mural there at the high school. They photoshopped the Confederate flag on their shirts and then this lynched black man. Okay, this is a horrific picture. And then of course the message on it is horrific as well. This happened the same year that Trump became president, right? He was officially president, inaugurated in January. And then in February, on the weekend of Martin Luther King weekend, this is the picture that came out on that weekend, okay? And so what happened was that my daughter was a high school student at the time. And as soon as she got home, she's like, Mom, have you seen this picture that came out today? So obviously they had it circulating amongst like 20 of their friends thinking it was funny. Eventually it got to a student that had a consciousness and leaked it out to somebody who had a huge following on Twitter. So then everybody had this picture within a matter of hours, right? And so my daughter came home and showed it to me, and I just shared it with all the organizers and activists and progressive organizations, grassroots organizations in Ventura County. And I said, this is what's happening in our schools, right? And so then we all collectively organized to start putting pressure on the school board to push for ethnic studies. And then 2-3 years later, we now have a resolution making ethnic studies a graduation requirement in Ventura, right? So yeah, all of these things surface, and they're very ugly and racist things that surface when we have racist leaders in positions of power. But then it also allows for us to see it, and we can collectively organize to push back. And so even though it's very ugly and these things really shouldn't happen, it gives us the ability to push back and create policies, right, to dismantle that. And so out of that came ethnic studies in Ventura. Okay, so I just wanted to share that. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so that you can continue, Oscar. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's real important. I mean, when I was up in Chico, you know, this whole Prop 187, when it was being promoted and the politicians were immigration, this is an invasion. They use words like that: illegal alien, invasion. You know, people get pumped up. I mean, this one young man who worked at Sizzler, he's got a family, he's got kids. He leaves work, he goes to the store to go buy some milk and some bread. And when he came out of the store, he got beat up, you know, by 2 white guys with a crowbar and a bat. And they left him in a coma, and he had permanent brain damage, you know? And I remember organizing a fundraiser, you know, so that the students, we could help them out. But this stuff has real impacts, you know, on our community. It's not just rhetoric, it's not just political rhetoric, you know, these, like Veronica said, you know, it emboldens people, the racism, it impacts us, and we feel it, you know, it divides us. It's not good. So the next law I want to talk about is Proposition 209. What's interesting about Proposition 209 is in Chico, there was an assembly member. I showed you guys the picture where we're protesting Bernie Richter. He's an assembly member. And he was the first assembly member to introduce anti-affirmative action legislation in the state assembly. And I went out to go speak out against it and all that. And then, so that law also passed in the state of California, Proposition 209. And here's the thing about affirmative action. Oh, well, let me just say this. Here's how history turns around. Now, in this election, you all have an opportunity to reverse the effect of Proposition 209. So I just got my voter guide from the state of California. These are all the propositions. So this one is Proposition 16. So Proposition 16 says that it allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, contracting decisions, legislative constitutional amendment. What affirmative action does is it allows the government to use race as one factor. So it's not the factor, the idea, oh, she got hired because she was Black. That's not affirmative action. What affirmative action does is exactly what happened in my life. I graduated from Santa Monica High School with a 2.9 GPA, less than a 700 on the SAT. So I wasn't really qualified, right? According to those two, pieces of information, the SAT and the GPA. But there were other things, that were promising about me, right? So Chico State University at the time was one of the widest school. It was the widest school, CSU Chico. And they had an affirmative action program. So this is how the program, how it got me in. I wasn't qualified to be admitted to the school, but I was qualifiable, meaning that there was promise, right? So they allowed me to go to the summer EOP program. They called it a summer bridge program. And the deal was, I'm a provisional admit. If I pass these 2 summer classes, then I gain a regular admission. Long story short, affirmative action got me in. It gave me an opportunity, but it didn't get me out. I had to do all the work. I didn't get extra credit because I was Latino on a test. And I graduated with high honors. I graduated with a 3.56 GPA, and I graduated as the first Latino student body president in the school's history. So, that's what affirmative action does. It gives opportunity because, and the reason why affirmative action started, even the term affirmative action came from LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. When he became president, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Lyndon Baines Johnson was the vice president. He became president. And because of all the turmoil of the 1960s at Howard University, he said, that it's not fair to say, hey, we're all equal, to have a race and let's say to put a Black man and a white man and to say, okay, go, when the Black man's hobbled by chains, basically slavery, Jim Crow, years of discrimination, right? So, the debate is going on right now. Like, how do you remedy systemic racism? You have to, you got to do it systematically. It's got to be institutional change. You can't just say, we're going to fix something in Ventura or Santa Monica. It's got to be throughout the state of California. It's got to be throughout the country, right? So affirmative action gives government one tool to remedy years of discrimination, to look at race as one factor, to say, for example, if you are in a school district where there's no Black teachers, you can say, hey, we need to go out and hire the best qualified Black teacher. We need a Black teacher. Of course, you can't hire a teacher that's not qualified, but it allows the school district then to find a qualified Black teacher and to use race as one of the factors in hiring that person. That's what Proposition 6, right now, it's illegal to do that. Right now, there is no race-based remedy that the government has because of Proposition 209. But now we have Proposition 16 on the ballot, and you have the opportunity to reverse the effects of Proposition 209. I want to show you a picture because I left Chico State and I went directly to the University of Texas in Austin in 1996. And when I got there, there was a whole movement around this case called Hopwood versus Texas. And I want to show you all. Well, that's 187, but let me see where okay. So this, can y'all see it?
No.
No, you can't. Oh, okay, that means I got to share. So let me see, I got to share first, share the screen. So I'm learning something today because I'm the, can you see that?
No.
Okay, hold on.
Not yet.
Okay, how about that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You can see it. Okay, see how it says Hopwood Aftermath. This was me, I was speaking in front of the Attorney General's office for the state of Texas. There was an Attorney General, his name was Dan Morales. He was the highest ranking Mexicano, highest ranking Mexican American in the state government. He was the Attorney General. What he did, because Hopwood, the reason why it's called Hopwood is because Cheryl Hopwood, she's a white woman. She applies to the university's law school and she was denied admission. And she claimed she was denied admission because of reverse racism. She said less qualified Blacks and Latinos were admitted while she was not. And so she sued the university and she won. The courts determined that affirmative action was wrong. So that was called the Hopwood decision. And, so now it made it harder for Black to the university. The Attorney General, in a political move, because he wants to get reelected, he expands the decision of Hopwood from admissions to scholarships and also to retention programs. So I don't know if any of you are in the EOP program or if you benefit from any scholarship for Latinos or Latinas in engineering, for example. All of those special scholarships to help out people of color were made illegal in the state of Texas. And not because of the court decision, but because of politics. Because the Attorney General decided that he will get more votes and get reelected if he expands the ruling of the court and hurts more Latinos and African Americans than people of color by eliminating also scholarships and retention programs to help students succeed in the university. So we took it to the streets. We organized a huge rally. Jesse Jackson spoke in the rally, and we got like 10,000 students to participate in this protest, like 10,000. And we had a big rally, and then we marched over to the law school, and we shut down the law school. The reason why is because one of the professors there, his name was Lino Graglia. This is what he said, and this is what pissed us off, and why we went to the law school and we shut it down. They had to escort this. They had to escort this professor with police, like 10 police officers had to escort him out because he got scared. Because like 1,500 of us went into the law school and we had to sit down. We shut down the law school for like 8 hours. But this is what this professor said. He said, the professor made these remarks. He said, Blacks and Mexican Americans are not academically competitive with whites in selective institutions. It is the result primarily of cultural effects. It seems to be the case that various studies seem to show that Blacks and Mexican Americans spend much less time in school. They have a culture that seems not to encourage achievement. Failure is not looked upon with disgrace. I mean, this is this guy, he's an older white guy, Italian, saying that we're not pretty much, that we have cultural defects that make it so that we're not competitive with whites. And he's not talking about any of the social issues. He's not talking about poverty or Jim Crow or underfunded schools or segregated schools. He's not talking about any of that. He's just talking about the cultural deficiency. And that comes from this eugenics movement, right? Like the foundation of all racism is that some people are deemed inferior. And if you have lighter skin, you're deemed as superior. The impact that it has on us, for those of us who are, darker skinned, is it makes you question your intelligence. It makes you develop an inferiority complex. And it's not just with these types of comments, but the public discourse, the way the politicians, articulate these laws. Even this professor, I mean, here's an educated man, professor at the law school saying that we're intellectually inferior because we have some cultural deficits. And that's not right at all, But that's why it's real important for us to understand that, the biggest fight we have as people of color, or anybody who's historically marginalized, all historically marginalized or oppressed groups, is what happens between our ears, right? How we view ourselves. When we view ourselves in the mirror, do we see someone who's smart? do we think that we're college material? I mean, the SAT test, when I took it and I saw my score, that made me feel like I wasn't college material, Even though I knew I could do it, that test made me think that I was intellectually inferior. And those tests, by the way, the reason why affirmative action is even necessary is because they implemented these tests when they were forced to desegregate public education. So the universities were forced to desegregate. They had to find another way to keep people of color out. And the SAT test was one strategy. And I mean, think about it. We put human beings on the moon, right? This country put human beings on the moon without the use of the SAT. So the point is that a lot of these tests are culturally biased. It's not that we have some cultural deficits, it's that we're confronting systemic racism, and we're confronting systems and a rigged system that many times is culturally biased against us and doesn't favor people of color. It reminds me of this TV show called Different Strokes. If you're old school like me, you remember what you're talking about, Willis. You talk about Arnold, and anyway, but it was a story of a rich white guy in New York who adopted 2 Black children from the hood. So that's a pretty interesting concept. But this white man he wants his Black children to attend a private school, and the private school has a test to get in. So Arnold, little Arnold, who's Black, and he came from Harlem, came from a very poor family. One of the questions in the test was, there's a house with 2 bedrooms. How many people live in the house? And his answer was 9. And he was like, 4 in 1 bedroom. He came up with a funny answer, but it was like, shit, you pack it up. It reminded me of me. I grew up 7 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, But the answer for the headmaster of the school said, well, the answer is 2. If you have 2 bedrooms, one person in 1 bedroom and another person in another bedroom. That's upper middle class lifestyle, right? So the test was culturally biased. But it's just an example, of how there's different ways to discriminate against people, and it seems like it's okay. It seems like, hey, you know what? Everybody has to take this test, but there's a discriminatory intent. Even within election systems, right? Even like right now, we're hearing about voter fraud and the mail system. If you defund the mail system right now, it's hard to have vote by mail, right? So there's a lot of different ways to discriminate against people without it being outright discrimination. In fact, I can create a job description, be able to meet. I can pick any one of you. Any one of you in this class, and I can develop a job description that only that person can qualify. And you can challenge me in court, and I can say, you know what, she met the job description. She met the needs of the job description. But I can write it in a way to discriminate against people. So there's a lot of ways, that we have to fight discrimination. But all of my life, I've been fighting systemic racism, or what I used to call institutionalized racism of oppression, right? Not just individual acts of racism. And see, that's what's so difficult for our generation, is that, you're not seeing sort of like, blacks in the back of the bus, right? You're not seeing, outright discrimination was allowed. Those were real signs that existed. You don't see that anymore. Now it's much more low key, right? It's systemic. And that's what we need to be looking at: laws, policies, budgets, hiring decisions, curriculum. That's why ethnic studies, if you look at ethnic studies as an anti-racist curriculum, because it is, the Eurocentric model of educating students just ain't gonna work for a new majority that's not white. I mean, that's the reality. We have to make all these people American. The way to do that is to enfranchise them, to make them feel that they're a part of this country, to have them see themselves in the curriculum, to make sure that we're not discriminating against people. In fact, racist people and people that are promoting white supremacy are hurting this country. They're the reason why people aren't acculturating as much as those white supremacists would like people to, because of the racism. And they're the biggest threat to national unity, not the diversity, not immigration, not affirmative action. It's white supremacy that's really the problem. But affirmative action in the state of California passed by the voters, and we saw, especially in law schools, medical schools, but law schools in particular, you saw a huge drop. UCLA, USC, all the UC schools, you saw a drop in enrollment for minority or people of color, students of color. Now, if you don't have lawyers, you can't have judges, right? It's harder to have legislators if you don't have lawyers. So it has a huge impact. Just like I was talking about the Nuremberg laws, I want you to all think about these series of laws as a way to weaken a population that's growing in numbers, because that's really the big fear. And if you look at also public education, like right now, we're 54% of all the students in the public education system, Latinos alone, 54%. But we're 41st, I think, or even lower than that in per pupil spending. So you see something really interesting. If I had a graph, I would show it to you. But basically, the Latino population is growing, or students of color are growing in population. And then you're seeing the defunding, right, of public education. But you're also seeing the funding of prisons, right? Mass incarceration, police budgets keep going up, prison budgets keep going up. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the state is trying to find a way to control the growing majority. Like whether it's outright racism or not is what's going on, is that there's systemic racism at play. And we have to correct that. Like we need to make sure that all children, regardless of what their race is or their income level, have equal opportunities to get a solid education. Because with a solid education, they're gonna get jobs, they're gonna be taxpayers, they're gonna, in fact, look, all we're trying to do is make the system work. You know what I'm saying? We're not the ones blowing up buildings, it's all the white supremacist groups that are doing all that. We ain't blowing up no buildings. I mean, if anything, we're shooting each other in the streets over gang shit. You know what I'm saying? Like we're not hurting nobody. We're not shooting up schools. That ain't us. We're just trying to get an education, make the system work for everybody. That's it. So affirmative action is one of the tools. And you all have an opportunity in this election, November 3rd or before, vote by mail, to reverse the effect of Proposition 209. Because what Proposition 209 did is it made it harder for people, for us to rectify years of discrimination and exclusion. I'll give you an example. I'm on the school board and I asked the question, I said, we have all this bond money, construction, a lot of schools are being remodeled, we're building new schools. How many of those contracts are going to minority or women-owned businesses? And they came back and they said it was about 5%. Like, how can you close an achievement gap if you don't close the economic gap? Like, you need to have equal opportunity in all areas of society. When 95% of the contracts, and it's millions of dollars, we're talking about taxpayer money here, and hundreds of millions, you're not sharing the prosperity, then some people are going to be left behind. And we don't want that. We want equal opportunities, or equity, which is more powerful than equality, is equity. But this protest, Hopwood versus Texas, was a big landmark court decision. And we responded. We organized, not only did we organize protests, we also got involved in the state legislature, and we came up with a law called the Top 10% Plan. And the law was very interesting because what we did is we did the studies and the research, and we found out that if we guaranteed admission to the top universities in the state of Texas, to the top high school graduating class, the top 10% of every high school graduating class, the schools were so segregated that you would end up having almost the same amount of Black and Latino students eligible for admission to the top universities. And that's why Texas, when we implemented that law, we didn't see the same drop in enrollment in law schools and university admissions as California experienced, because we had a solution that was race neutral, and it was not as effective as affirmative action, but it made sure that we didn't see the negative impact as much as we saw in the state of California. I'll show you another picture. This was, we were organizing a group of, can y'all see this one? Yeah. So this is we were planning a meeting. This was a planning meeting. It was interesting because, I have an LA hat. You can't see it very well, but I have an LA hat on. I'm in Austin, Texas with an LA hat, and I'm coming back from Prop 187. I was already into the movement, you know, and so, you know, it helped me out a lot because I already knew about all the arguments. I already was hip already. You know, I love the concept of hip hop. Hip hop is hip, get knowledge, and then hop, take action, right? So get the knowledge and take action. So all of you getting your education, we expect you to get involved in your community, whatever you become. If you're a lawyer, a teacher, a journalist, you know, you have a role to play in fighting systemic racism. Anyway, this was us planning, you know, as a student leader. I was a graduate student, and you know, a friend of mine told me, "Damn, Oscar, like, how'd you even have time for school? Because I always saw you doing protests and everything." And you know what? For me, I wrote all my papers. I wrote them about like what I was protesting. Like everything that all my research was about, like the work, you know, the laws, the legislation. So, you know, as you get involved, as you think about your graduate studies or even your undergraduate studies, think about getting involved in something that you care about, you're passionate about, and make it part of your research paper. Make it part of. Find a way to get classroom credit for your activism. You know, real important. I'll take any questions about affirmative action, Prop 209, or even Proposition 16. You know, there's this law that we're going to vote on soon. You know, any questions?
Is there a quick thing, like a quick, snappy response that you would give to people who say, oh, affirmative action is just another form of racism. Oh, affirmative action is going to hurt Asians. Anything just quick and snappy that you can say, bam, done.
Yeah, well, you know, I think the first thing to say is, you know, affirmative action gives people opportunities, you know, and we're trying to rectify years of systemic racism, you know, and it just gives people opportunities. They still have to produce. Like, it doesn't, like, you might get into affirmative action as one, you know, it's just one factor. It's just they use race as one factor. But that, I think the quick thing is to say, you know, we want to remedy systemic racism, and we want to give people an opportunity. Ultimately, you have to be qualified to do the job. Like, no one's going to stay in a job if they can't hang. If they're not qualified to do the job, they're not going to stay. You know, there's evaluation. Like when you're a teacher, for example, you have evaluations. When you're an employee, you have evaluations. If you're not doing the job, you're not going to stay. So no one gets to stay because of affirmative action. So the idea that, oh, you know, she was hired because she was Black, you know, that might have been one of the reasons, but it's not the reason. You know what I'm saying? It's just one of the reasons. All we're doing with affirmative action is allowing the government to use race as one factor. But there's multiple other factors that are considered in hiring or university admissions. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like in university admissions, well, here's like one thing. Like, I mean, first of all, we have to acknowledge we live in a society where racism does exist. So if racism exists, like, how do we rectify it? You know, and you have to have solutions. So affirmative action is one tool, and you know, there's other solutions as well. I mean, if people want to do reparations, like but I think, look, you know, this is the government ensuring that there's more equality in giving out jobs or contracts or admissions, you know, any of that. But it'd be important for people to read it, to understand it, and in any case, there's no quotas. There's no such thing as quotas. And the other thing too is, like, if people are offended by affirmative action, let's say in university admissions, why aren't they offended by the affirmative action in the prison system? Like, you have an affirmative action, like there was no law that was passed, right, to say we're going to put more Black people in jail than anybody else. But you know that's going on through racial profiling, right? And the other reality is white people benefit from affirmative action as well. The number one beneficiaries of affirmative action have been white women. Like, white women benefited from affirmative action more than Black men. Let's just be real about that, you know? Because it wasn't just about minority candidates, it was also about women. So that's also important to say. Any other questions?
I'm going to jump on that too and just kind of really bring the focus back, because what happens, a tactic is that, you know, there's diversion, right? It's like, oh, but that's reverse racism or whatever. And it's diverting from the fact that we're addressing, which is systemic and institutionalized and structural racism exists. It's embedded within our systems, right? So that's what we're addressing. We're addressing that, and we're trying to dismantle that. And so to folks who are used to having so much privilege and benefiting from structural racism, to them it feels like reverse racism. To them it feels like now they're being oppressed. But what it is that they're not used to sharing that privilege, right? That is supposed to be shared amongst all peoples. And so that's the lens that they're looking at it through. They're still looking at it through a very racialized and oppressive lens rather than an equity lens, okay? So that's one thing that we really need to talk about. And the other thing too is that we need to realize when we're talking about how we have to make the system work for everyone, please understand that the system was never set up to give minoritized groups as many opportunities as white folks. It was never set up like that, even from the very beginning, from the Constitution on up to all the policies that we're still dealing with today. Okay, so the system is actually working the way it was supposed to work, right? And so that's why we're still dealing with everything that we're dealing with. Now, I want to give you an example, myself included, along with Oscar's story, is that had the system gotten the best of us, we would have never made it to a college or university or made it to where we are right now, okay? And for a while there, we were allowing the system to put us right where they wanted us to be, right? We were locked in poverty. We were living in el barrio. There was crime around us. We were maybe succumbing to that and being part of that because that's all we knew and that's all that was around us. And that was what was meant to happen, right? But we were some of the lucky ones that somehow we were able to become politicized because of whatever journey that we took. And that is what right there, that's what ignited us to be able to see the system for what it was and to continue fighting for our own education and then fighting for our people. And that's why we became educated. But the truth of the matter is the majority of our gente, the majority of minoritized groups don't have those opportunities. And that's why we're trying to push hard to make sure that people really understand what's happening around us so that they can have that consciousness, right? That paradigm shift and understand what's happening in the system so that they know what steps they need to take in order to push back and address that and get what they deserve too, what they have a right to. We have a right to education. There are barriers that are put in our way so that to prevent us from getting an education, right? Like Oscar said, there are more of us in prisons than there are in the universities. That's a problem. That's systemic, right? So those are the things that we're fighting against. But other questions and comments, please, folks, speak up.
Oh, and just for the record, Proposition 209 passed in 1996. So 1994 was Prop 187, and then 2 years later, you have this anti-affirmative action law called Prop 209 in 1996.
Who has other questions or comments? Jose, you want to go ahead and share your comment out loud? That's a great point that you're making.
So I was just saying that, critics of affirmative action tend to not recognize, or they do, they ignore it. But the fact that marginalized people have to work a lot harder to get to a point where like their qualifications are equal to someone who is white. So because they didn't have all the privileges growing up, to get to a point where they have all the same qualifications, they have to work much harder. So when you talk about affirmative action, it takes that into account, the fact that they had to put a lot more effort than, an otherwise equal white candidate would have.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're still dealing with segregation in our neighborhoods and in our schools, right? So a lot of us come from neighborhoods and schools where the majority were either one group of people or the other group of people, right? So yeah, we have some mixing, but we still have a majority of one group of people or the other group of people. So that means segregation still exists. And because segregation still exists, many of our schools are not equally funded. So we'll have schools in neighborhoods where there's a lot of poverty. They don't get as much property taxes as schools that are in more affluent communities, right? They get way more property taxes. So that means they have more resources, better schools, as in the actual buildings are big and clean and state of the art, while our schools look like prisons. They're very old, they're falling apart, right? We have teachers that are not as well prepared as teachers in the more affluent communities. The more affluent schools have so much more funding that they have a lot more resources, less students in a classroom space, right? So that means they get more attention from their teacher. So if they're falling behind, then it's addressed right away. And then also parents from affluent communities are able to invest in their child's education, right? By putting money away for college, university. But while they're in high school, they have money to invest to be able to give them private tutoring lessons on a regular basis so that their GPA are skyrocketing. They're preparing them because they know to get into a university, you know, you have to have all these qualifications. And then they have all this all this money that they can put into preparing their children to take the SATs, right? So that they're taking preparation classes. A lot of our people, they don't have that kind of money. Like there's no way they have that kind of money. I know my family didn't. And I couldn't even go through that path. You know, I had to go through the community college path because I was not in AP classes. I did not even take the SAT. I almost dropped out of school, right? I had to make up units at a continuation school. So I had to go through all those barriers. So those are the things that our people are facing. And that's a very good point, Jose. Thank you for that. Daniela, go ahead and ask your question.
So my question to Oscar is that I talk to friends and even family members who believe in the end voting does not really matter. Like their vote doesn't matter at the end. Like what would you say to people that have that kind of mind, that mentality?
Yeah. Well, I can say that, you know, first of all, voting does matter because we have large numbers now. I mean, it matters for us to vote, to get involved. And it's you know, a lot of people have died, you know, for us to have the right to vote. And you have to understand, like, there's a lot of voter suppression. You know, people in power always try to find a way to make it harder for people to vote. And for all those people, so anytime you see the, you know, people in power trying to stop people from voting, then you have to ask yourself why. And it's because, you know, it threatens their power, you know. But, you know, we have to get involved and we have to, look, I used to believe the same way. I used to think, you know what, I think grassroots organizing is more important. You know, protesting and putting pressure. I mean, like you look at these laws, like, you know, all the protest movement, it does impact, you know, public policy, it does. Riots, I mean, you can use violence and there's been studies that show that violence also creates change. But, you know, then the other thing too is like, you look at nonviolence, social justice work, which I subscribe to that. I think that nonviolent social action is really where it's at in terms of real lasting change, you know? So there's different people, you know, different people believe in different things. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. But ultimately, if we vote together as a block, a united block, we will make a difference. You know, I'm running for city council right now here in Santa Monica because we lack a seat at the table, and the housing prices are going up way out of control. Our people are being pushed out, gentrification, you know, which is pushing lower income people out of the city. And we don't have a voice, you know, on the city council. We don't have a strong voice. And so I'm running for office. I'm running for city council. And you know what? It is disheartening, you know, like it's like you look at how much money the opposition gets, and it's not easy. I mean, the comment that was made, you know, like how we have to work twice as hard. I get certain questions that no white candidate would get. Like, for example, are you going to represent the whole city or just your neighborhood? You know, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm running for city council, you know, for the whole city, of course. But no white candidate would ever get that question, you know what I'm saying? Because racism exists. I mean, certain things, you know, I missed a meeting and somebody said, oh yeah, they felt that you disrespected the group. And this is a white guy telling me this. He goes, Oscar, another person missed that meeting as well. So you weren't the only one. But it's funny how they didn't say anything about disrespect. And he says, he goes, because you're Mexican, they look at it as disrespectful. But the white guy missed the same meeting and they didn't attribute disrespect to him. They just, oh, he was busy, he had something else going on, you know? So racism exists. Even when you have a master's degree, you're on the school board, you can have all the accomplishments in the world. If you're a person of color, people attribute certain traits, certain things about you just because of what you look like, you know? And that's not fair. And so as long as we have racism existing in our society, we have to find remedies to that. And that's why affirmative action is one remedy. But going to the issue of voting, I mean, think that, let's say 1965, they passed the Voting Rights Act. I mean, Black people were not allowed to vote. And then when they started allowing Black people to vote, they had a poll tax, meaning that you had to pay to vote. So if you were poor, you didn't have no money to vote. They made it just for the rich. Or they had a test, like a literature test. You had to read certain things. But if you were never provided schooling, you couldn't read, so you can't vote. So there's a lot of different ways that they keep people from attaining power. And you know, Malcolm X used to say, by the ballot or the bullet. And essentially, if you don't transfer power and you don't attain power by nonviolent means, we see what happens in other countries. And it's sad to say, but this country is going also into some very dangerous waters. Then you end up with violence, right? Where people take power over violence. It's almost like a street gangs. Like, you know, who's gonna sell drugs on this block? Well, it ain't gonna be through a vote, you know what I'm saying? It's gonna be through guns. And so voting is a way to avoid violence, to have hopefully a peaceful transfer of power through an election. I think it's a very good solution that human beings have developed. Now, it's not perfect, right? Mm-hmm. But it makes a lot of sense. Like we have an opportunity to vote, to make change, to support people and policies that we care about, or to vote against them. And that's, I think, you know, it's not, like I said, it's not a perfect system, but it's I think, you know, it's better than not having it, and we can still keep improving on it, you know. Like right now, for example, I mean, what if we just eliminated why don't we make voting a national holiday? Like in Mexico, on the day of the election, nobody works. So here we're forcing people to choose work or voting, or if they go to work, they don't have time to go vote, you know. But in other countries, on the day of the election, no one goes to work. It's a national holiday. That's an improvement on our democracy, you know. So the system we have is not perfect, but we can keep making it better. And one day, I mean, they're going to allow younger, maybe 17-year-olds, you know, are allowed to vote. Maybe you register to vote when you become a senior in high school. That's a mandatory policy. Like they're doing it with driver's licenses and stuff. So there's a lot of improvements that we have to make to our system to make it a better system where people, I mean, right now, for example, you know, there's a whole bunch of people disenfranchised because they're on probation for a felony or they're incarcerated and they can't vote, you know, even though they're paying the price for the crimes they committed. Why don't we allow them to vote? Like, shouldn't they have a right to vote, you know? I mean, there was a time when women didn't have the right to vote. Like in this country, here in the United States, not until what, 1920s, right? That women won the right to vote. So, like I said, it's not a perfect system, but we have continued to make it better and better and better. And I think it's going to get better if we stay involved and we push, you know, we keep pushing. Other questions?
Gary, you want to ask your question? And we have like a minute left, so let's try to be.
Yes, thank you. Do you think COVID-19 is now a new way of cutting us off from education and all that?
You know, that's a very good question. Well, for sure, you know, COVID-19 is real. I mean, it's a pandemic. People, you know, it's a virus. I mean, we know it's true. It exists, and it's happened throughout in the past. I mean, we had the Spanish flu, what I think, when was that? 1918, I believe, World War I. And, you know, it killed a lot of people. And, you know, we're right now, I mean, there's a lot of parents that want the schools to reopen, you know, and we're pushing to, I'm on the school board, we're looking at plans right now to reopen schools January 5th. But you're right. I mean, you know, it's definitely, I look at it like this. You got to look at the impact and you say who benefited and who got hurt. And maybe right now we don't see it all, but we're starting to see some of it, right? I mean, essential workers, Latinos on the front line, we're hurting the most. We're dying in larger numbers than others. If you're low income, you got to go to work. Education wise, I mean, think about, we're going to study this later on, right? But what was the impact on education? A lot of kids fell behind. The kids that were already falling behind are going to fall more behind, right? So you start looking at who really benefited from COVID. I mean, the people that, the vaccine, you know, there's some people making money, right, off of COVID. And there's some people that are going to be hurt. So I think history is going to show. I mean, when people study it and look at it, you know, I don't know. Your question's a good question, but definitely when you study 5 years or maybe even 3 years down the line, the impact of COVID, but maybe 5 years down the line, you'll start to see what real, you know, who benefited, who won, and who lost.
I do want to share that I did post a link on in the chat, and I'm also posting it on Facebook because there are people commenting. But the link is a AJ Plus video where they talk about how DeVos, who's in charge of education at the federal level, is using, you know, her and her family. It's so crazy because it's such a conflict of interest. They're investors in the private school and charter school system. Okay, so she's making money off of privatizing schools, and she's trying to use what's happening right now with the education system under COVID to funnel more people into the privatized sector of education. And so she's making a lot of money off of this. Okay, it's a major conflict of interest, major. So make sure that you click on that YouTube link before we close the chat so that you can watch it. It's a pretty good, concise, short video to the point, and that explains how that's happening. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I did include the link there in the chat as well. So take a look on that. And so I know you want to announce one more thing, Oscar. Go for it, about your campaign.
Yeah. So I'm running for city council, and I want to offer you all an opportunity to do some phone banking. You can do it from your home. We give you with your email and a passcode that we'll provide you. You can get into our system, and we'll do a training. So you all will be trained on how to do this. It's new technology where how you can reach voters. We give you a script and we give you a training, and I recommend that you all should try it for a couple of hours. You can volunteer at your leisure. And this Wednesday, we're going to have a training. So right there on the webpage that I provided you, you can go into the volunteer section and give us your name and your email and your phone number, and we'll contact you. And we'd love to give you all an opportunity and a training, and give you an opportunity to see what it's like to do some phone banking on a political race. Some of you might want to run for office one day. So it's important to understand some of that. And I would love to share my experience and my ideas and my views with you all to prepare you for that, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and to get that kind of training is gold. It just gives you like more power, more understanding on how the political campaigns work and whatnot. Usually they give you a script to follow, so you don't, you're prepared. You're not walking into a phone conversation just blank. Like, they prepare you. You have a phone script. But again, you've heard now Oscar's story and his political viewpoint on everything that's going on. So if that's something that you believe in and that you see yourself aligned with that, and you want to be an agent of change to help with that, then this is an opportunity for you to do that. Okay, so we highly encourage you to do that. If you do that, please, again, get on that link that Oscar provided and let him know. But also remember to let me know and do your Agents of Change project on that. Okay, there are many opportunities, and I don't want to I don't want you guys to fall behind on your agents of change activities, because by the time you know it, it's like the last week of school and everybody's scrambling to try to get an activity in there. Every single speaker on here has given you all opportunities to do something, and they're all doable things, okay? That's why I'm not assigning like crazy tests to study for, or long-term papers or anything like that, because I want you to free up your time to become an agent of change, okay? So please remember that that's the trade-off and the agreement that we had for this class, okay? Now's the time. So with that, I want to end and thank Oscar for your time. Thank you for putting your life on the line. Thank you for dedicating your life to el movimiento, to the struggle, and to the resistance, la resistencia of marginalized communities. Thank you for everything you've done, and I wish you the best of luck on your campaign, because we need more people like you in our local elections and local seats. Thank you so much. And if you all want to say your thank yous and goodbyes, unmute yourself so that you can do that. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. All.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck, everybody. Keep working hard on your studies. Keep get that education, get that knowledge, and then hop to action. Do something with it. You know, get involved in your community. You know, volunteer. Leave this world in a better position for the next generation. That's what we should all commit to. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.